All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Happy World Ocean Day. Welcome to all families, kids, educators, and others who are excited about our ocean. And thank you for taking part in this first ever Little Inventors event. My name is Joe Grabowski from Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. We're a nonprofit organization that brings science, exploration, adventure, and conservation live into classrooms across Canada through virtual speakers and field trips. Since schools closed in March, we've been broadcasting 3 to 4 live events each day into the homes of parents, educators, and students. So check us out at exploringbytheseat.com. We have a ton of Ocean Week events coming up. So today, we celebrate World Ocean Day along with millions of people around the globe who realize that our oceans are very important to us and our planet. Oceans are the lungs of our planet, providing most of the oxygen we breathe. They cover over 70% of the Earth's surface and play a major role in the daily life of millions of people. They also provide food for regions across the world and have huge impacts on our weather. And yet, we neglect them. So scientists say that by 2050, the mass of plastic in the ocean will outweigh that of fish. And that's why we're here today, to learn more about what we can do to make our oceans healthier. So to start us off, we'll have an ocean expert tell us about some of the major challenges faced by the ocean. Hey, Paul. Then you'll learn a bit about how you can challenge yourself to help the oceans by joining the extraordinary Little Inventors challenge called Mission Protect Our Oceans. That's when our friend Catherine will tell us a bit more about Little Inventors. Hey, Catherine. But wait, hold on a minute. There's a super distinguished guest who will kick off today's event with a special message. So our Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, the Honorable Navdi Bains, is going to join us with a video here. So give me one moment for the share screen. All right.
Hi everyone, I'm Navdi Bains, Canada's Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. And I'd like to wish you a happy World Oceans Day. Even though we can't be together in person, we can still work together to protect our oceans. Saviez-vous que les océans couvrent plus de 70% de notre planète? Ils sont essentiels à la vie sur Terre. But as you know, overpopulation and industrialization have taken their toll. That's why we've launched the NSERC Little Inventors Challenge, mission which is to protect our oceans. Donc, mon défi pour vous est de trouver des idées créatives et de désigner des inventions incroyables pour nous aider à protéger les océans. I'm confident that with the use of science and our best creativity, together we can create a better future for our oceans. Visit the website and get involved today. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
All right. Well, great stuff. A huge shout out to Mr. Bains for joining us today. So before we meet our ocean expert, Paul Snelgrove, let's have a little look at another video here that's going to highlight the new Little Inventors Challenge.
The oceans cover 70% of our planet. It's where life started, and we simply wouldn't survive without them. Plastics, climate change, overpopulation, and other problems are all putting our oceans at risk. But we can start building a better future for our oceans, with your help. We are sure you can invent the best ideas to look after the oceans and all life, in and out of them. NSERC and the Canadian Commission for UNESCO are inviting you to take on the new Little Inventors Challenge, Mission Protect Our Oceans. Last year, our challenge took the imagination of Canadian youth to space. Imagine what we can do this year. Little Inventors encourages children to use their creativity and imagination to explore real-world challenges. The most ingenious invention ideas to help protect our oceans will be made real. The top inventors will be invited to celebrate the launch of the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development in 2021. A few others will be invited to submit their ideas to the Canadian Science Fair Journal and be published. Upload your ideas at nserc.littleinventors.org by December 20th, 2020. For full free project resources, see nserc.littleinventors.org. Brought to you by Little Inventors and the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, in partnership with the Canadian Commission for UNESCO and the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, in collaboration with Let's Talk Science.
All right. Another great video to kick us off here. So as you can see, we'll be calling on kids across Canada to come up with some cool inventions. And to help you come up with your amazing ideas, we'll now have a chat with someone who understands our oceans very, very well. So everyone join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Snelgrove. He works in Newfoundland at Memorial University and is a research professor in the Department of Ocean Sciences and Biology department. He is also the Associate Scientific Director in the Ocean Frontier Institute, and he's also Network Director of NSERC, Canadian Healthy Oceans Network. So Paul, it's so great to have you joining us live from Newfoundland today.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's nice to be here and nice to see all those smiling faces out there. I look forward to celebrating Oceans Day together.
All right, perfect. Well, let's dive right in here. So Paul, you're a biologist, you're an oceanographer, you have spent your professional life looking for healthier oceans and making marine life count. So why did you get into this field? What keeps you doing what you do?
Well, I grew up next to the oceans, and once I started taking courses on ocean sciences, I was really amazed at the complexity and all the things that go on in the ocean. What you're seeing here on the screen is ocean circulation, and these colors show you ocean temperature. And that's really important because that's what determines who lives there, and this spectacular array of life, these bizarre organisms, and trying to figure out what they do and what happens if we lose them, because we think they play a key role, and we'd like to understand what's going to happen in the future.
All right. So we know a little bit about why you dove into the oceans in the first place, but what does an average day look like for you? What is your work all about, Paul?
I'd say an average day looks a lot like today in many ways, except I'm at home instead of in my office. But on a normal day, I would have my students coming to see me. I would go and give a lecture perhaps. But what's really exciting are short periods of time, usually a few weeks, when I go out in the field and do field work. And so what I'm showing you here is some work I did up in the Arctic, where we had to ride a helicopter out onto that ship that you see on the screen there. And what we did is a work looking at what lives on the ocean bottom. And so in the lower left here, what we see is a remotely operated vehicle. This is like a robot, and we lower it down to the bottom and we watch what's going on here in the upper right-hand corner, and we try to understand what's happening below us. And so we see spectacular images such as these deep water corals. This is actually a photograph off the east coast of Canada, and trying to understand these environments and how they're changing because of what we're doing as a dominant species on the planet.
All right. And Paul, tell us a little bit more about your area of study.
Well, I actually work on the seafloor, and I'll just give you one example. So some of you may know that Canada recently declared a new marine protected area called Laurentian Channel. And this is just south of Newfoundland. This area here, you see the little arrow. And we're trying to understand what benefits we're likely to gain from this marine protected area. And so if you look at this image here on the right, what you'll see is a robotic vehicle collecting a sediment sample from the bottom. What we'll do is bring that up to the surface. We'll bring it on deck of the ship and actually do an incubation experiment where we see how the animals change in response to different variables like temperature. And from that, we can understand what the future oceans could look like.
All right. Very cool, Paul. So I've been lucky. I've been able to dive over the last 12, 13 years in amazing places all around the world. I've seen some pretty cool things. I'm really curious about what the most fantastic thing you have seen in your time researching our oceans.
So for me, it's got to be diving in the submersible Alvin on hydrothermal vents in the Gulf of Mexico. And what you see here is an image of tube worms. These are animals that are about 1 meter long, and they've actually changed the way we think about life on Earth. And the reason for that is that these guys don't get their energy from sunlight and plants. They get it from chemicals in the ocean. And that forced us to rewrite all our textbooks because it completely changed our view of life. And so I had the good fortune to dive on one of these hydrothermal vents and see these spectacular animals in action and really understand the fundamentals of how different ways of life work on Earth.
All right. So we all know there's challenges facing the ocean. A couple years ago, I was on a deep sea expedition off the coast of Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and dozens of miles offshore, using ROVs to explore 3-4 kilometers down, we still saw evidence of human activity: fishing nets, pop cans, other things that have been discarded. So in your opinion, Paul, what is one of the biggest challenges that our oceans are facing?
Well, like you, I've done a lot of dives and video type sampling in the deep ocean, and there is garbage everywhere, and it's very discouraging. But what I would say is when I started out, I would have said the most serious impact is fishing. And the fact that we overfish, it's an important industry, it supports livelihoods, but we do too much and we don't necessarily manage as well as we could have in many cases. But more recently, I would say the greater issue has become climate change. And the reason for that is because it's the entire planet, whereas fishing targets particularly geographic locations. If we look at climate change, it's everywhere. And it acts in concert with other pressures, including fishing and pollution and plastics and all those other problems that we face in the ocean. And the cumulative effects really are really quite worrisome. And so we are seeing major changes even over the last 10 years.
All right, so we've heard a lot in the past weeks about we're all in this together, obviously with the situation that we're facing with COVID-19, but I think this applies in a lot of situations, particularly taking care of our oceans. So caring for them is for everyone and not just those that live near it. That's the question I get a lot is, well, I don't live near the ocean. So why is it a big deal? Why should people even far away from the ocean care about it? Why should we feel that we're all in this together?
Well, some people have likened the Earth as a superorganism, and so all the different pieces interact with each other in creating a healthy environment in which we live. Now, people commonly say that the oceans produce roughly half of the oxygen we breathe. So that's just one example of how all the interconnectedness between the ocean and life on land really plays a fundamental role in our lives, no matter where we live. And so even if you don't live on the shoreline, even if you never go to the beach, it still affects life on this earth. It affects the food available to us, the air that we breathe, the pollutants that we end up ingesting. It's all related.
All right. So millions of people around the world are going to be celebrating World Ocean Day today. In fact, throughout the week, there's going to be all kinds of amazing ocean events. I'm celebrating today with my Shark Crew shirt, and I'll probably watch some Blue Planet later. Paul, what are you going to do to help celebrate World Ocean Day?
Well, I'm here, and I think it's really important for groups like us to have discussions about the issues related to the oceans, because a lot of it is out of sight. And the image I just popped up on your screen, what you see on the top there is clear cutting on land. We know that's a big problem. If we cut down all the forests, that creates a whole variety of issues for humans. But when we do bad things in the oceans, it doesn't necessarily look obvious that anything has happened because we see the surface. We don't see what's going on beneath. And so trying to understand and appreciate these changes, I think is hugely important. And so on Oceans Day, I try and talk to people and let them know what the issues are and hopefully what they can do to help to address them.
All right. Awesome. Great stuff, Paul. So we have one more question for you. We want to know, right now we have youth tuning in from across Canada. I know there's people tuning in from the US, even outside of the US right now. Other people will catch the recording of this event. So do you think that kids, the youth, how can they contribute to help improve our ocean's health?
Oh, absolutely. I think everybody has to contribute if we're going to be successful. It's such a pervasive problem. It's all around the world, a whole variety of issues. And so everybody needs to chip in and do what they can. And so at home, for example, you can try and use less plastic. If you're using plastic, try and recycle it so it doesn't end up in the ocean. If you are doing something with pollutants, try and think about how you could reduce that. and find other ways to try and solve the problem. So nasty chemicals for cleaning, perhaps. Sometimes you could use something like vinegar is a perfectly good cleaner. So it's thinking every day about what you do and the impacts of what you do, what it may mean for life further down the road, and the oceans, no matter how close you live to them.
All right. Awesome, Paul. Thank you so much for sharing some of your ocean insights with us, your experiences, and the just incredible work that you do. We really appreciate it. We're going to change gears just a little bit now. We're going to bring Catherine Mangarden into the conversation. She's the chief educator with Little Inventors and has been working hard to implement the Oceans Challenge across Canada. So Catherine, great to have you joining us live today.
Hello, very nice to meet you all. It's a real pleasure.
All right, awesome. Well, I think the burning question I have to start is, what's the response been so far?
It's been amazing. There's no two ways about it. It's been really one of my joys every day is to see the inventions that we get through from children across Canada. And we've received some extraordinary things, some very thoughtful ideas. So it's obvious that the children are really responsive to that. Some really funny ones too. So I thought I might share a few with you just to inspire you. But we've received hundreds of invention ideas. And I think that the thing to say is that some of these ideas are going to be made into real objects. And so like, it's important for you to send us your ideas. And it doesn't matter, they don't have the best drawing in the world, but if you have an idea, please share it with us and we'll look at them and you'll always get feedback from us as well. So I'm just gonna share my screen and I'm going to show you, hopefully, there we go. Can you see this?
We got it, we're ready.
Okay, so these are some of the inventions that we received. So this is the dolphin speaker, and I really like this invention because it was about fishing and how to protect dolphins. And the idea was to have a speaker that would make the sound of orcas to scare the dolphins away from the fishing nets. And I thought that was a really neat idea and a beautiful drawing as well. And then we've got something that Paul might like as well. It's an app about overfishing. So it's for people to actually capture information about fishing and the species and stuff like that. And it's really raising awareness of things. So again, it's a really nice way of integrating technology, the way we use it, and applying it to the problem of the oceans and overfishing, for example. And here's another one. We've received a lot of inventions about how to pick up garbage in the sea, and it's a big problem, but it's also nice to look at things which are more specific. So one of the things is that plastics break down into what we call microplastics, and they're really, really hard to get rid of. And actually, sea creatures swallow them, and that's just not very good for them at all. So what was really nice with this invention is it was an invention that sort of sucks up the water and basically filters out the microplastic. So again, I just thought that was a really lovely piece of thinking there. And I think I had another one I want to show you. That's this one. This is the Octopus Slapper 2000. And you don't have to be 10, 12, 15 to do an invention. This is an invention by Eric, who is 6. And he thought that a great way to protect fishes would be to have this octopus slapper machine that would slap predators away. And it's just a really funny, beautiful idea. So all ideas are welcome, and we would love to see what you've come up with. And to do that, what you can do is go to we've got a website, which is NSERC.littleinventors.org. And on that, you're going to find basically loads and loads of resources. We've got loads of resources on there about the ocean, the creatures in the oceans, but also things about the water cycle, the influence of the ocean, the place of the ocean in the weather, and things like that. So you can have a look at that and just get inspired, and then do your invention and send it to us, please.
All right, very cool. And then Catherine, what about social media? Can students get involved on social media? Can they maybe post some of their designs?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we would recommend that you always share your designs with us online on the Little Inventors website, but we also have mini challenges. So we've got one happening this week, so look out for it. That's on Twitter and on Facebook, and you can basically share your drawings on there too. But do make sure you send them to us as well so we can look at them and include them.
All right, very cool. So nsirc.littleinventors.org. And wow, the Octopus Slapper 2000, that's tough competition already. So I can see there's lots of good stuff coming in already. Very cool, Catherine. Thanks so much for sharing some of those with us today.
With pleasure.
All right. Well, I think it's time that we find out who's out there with us. We've got a great group joining us live on camera from across Canada, even in the US. So I'm going to pick on a few to see what kind of questions they have. But you're not left out if you're live on YouTube right now. There's a chat sidebar on the right. Let us know where you're watching from. Send us in some questions. We'll work some of those in for Catherine and Paul. In fact, let me give a few shout outs from YouTube. There's way too many to get them all, but we've got Miss Pennington's grade 3 class joining us. We've got grade 4s in Oakville, Ontario joining us, Burlington, Ontario as well, Kelowna, British Columbia, Burnstown, Ontario, Nova Scotia, Spencer Ave Elementary School in Orangeville. Let's pick a couple more here before we get to questions. Ottawa, Brampton. All right, very cool. We've got a great group. Oh, even Miami, Florida, very cool. So I hope you get to spend a little time near the ocean today. Pretty lucky. All right, well, let's get to that Q&A action. We're gonna pick a group who's on camera with us right now and see if they have a question after hearing Paul speak. So Claire is hanging out with us in Waterdown, Ontario. Let me turn that microphone on. In fact, Claire, you're gonna have to help me out. It's not turning on for me. Hi, Claire.
Hi, what can kids do to help the ocean?
Yeah, so the question is, what can kids do to help the oceans? Well, we've heard a little bit about that in some of our discussions. I think the other thing that came up is using social media. If you're involved in social media, talk to your friends, tell them what you've heard and what you're concerned about and how important you think the oceans are for them and for you. And so I think spreading the word is something that's really important. And again, reduce, recycle, reuse, all those things, really important for sustainability.
All right, Paul, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is such an easy but powerful thing you can do. Get excited about the ocean, tell people about it. Learn about the issues it's facing, tell people about it. Because if they do that to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else, it just grows and grows and grows. So that's awesome advice, Paul. Thanks so much for sharing that with us today. All right. Let's go to Guelph, Ontario this time. Ms. Lacostro is hanging out with us and her students are tuning in via YouTube. Let's get that microphone turned on. Oh, I'm gonna have to get you to help me out with that again as well. There we go.
Hi, I have a question from Brianna, and Brianna heard the fact about that there's more plastic, there might be more plastic than fish in the ocean by 2050. And she couldn't believe that. And also we're wondering, where is all the plastic coming from? Like, how does it actually get into the oceans?
Well, it's a great question. Of course, all the plastic comes from us, but the way it gets there typically is through rivers and through sewage. And so if we throw things in the garbage and they get washed off the land, they break up and eventually end up in the ocean in different sized particles. And so it can be tiny little particles and it can be big particles. It can be things like bottles and cigarette butts and all sorts of things like that. There is also some industry, although it's starting to decrease, that will actually put microplastics in their products. And they do this because it increases their efficiency. But of course, from an environmental perspective, that's not very good. And so we'd like to see less and less of those products that have microplastics deliberately put into them, because they will eventually end up in the ocean, because in the end, everything is transported towards the ocean from land to rivers to the sea.
All right, great question. You know, it's funny, I'm looking at the YouTube chat right now and the Little Inventors, the ones that you shared with us, Catherine, are already got a discussion going. There's the debate with students going as to how the dolphin speaker would work, the positioning, the sounds it would need to make, the frequencies. So it's really neat to see this little side discussion going on, people thinking about how they could tweak the designs and come up with things to help the ocean. So that's really awesome. I like seeing that stuff happening.
One thing I could say is that don't worry too much about how things happen. We really want is to hear about the idea, the concept of it, because what we do is that we work with makers and designers and professionals, and they kind of take care of the bit that is the difficult bit, but you'll be included in the conversation as well. So what we want is the idea.
All right, so we want the big ideas, and then the experts are there to help refine those big ideas. All right, I like that a lot. Okay. Let's see here. Let's turn on another microphone. This time I'm going to go to Alberta. We have Arwen and Aurelia joining us right now. Let me turn that on. Oh, microphones just aren't cooperating today. If you guys don't mind unmuting on your end for me, and we'll grab your ocean question. There we go. Hey, Alberta, how are the two of you doing today?
Can we write a letter?
Oh, I like that. So Paul, they're wondering about writing letters. Can that be helpful?
Absolutely. And so you could get your mom or your dad to help you write a letter to your member of parliament and tell them that you care about the oceans and that you want to see greater sustainability efforts in Canada and around the world, and that you're going to do your bit to try and make sure that the oceans are sustainable for future generations. So absolutely write letters. You could write a letter to your local paper and say the oceans are important. You know, let's make sure that we allow them to continue into the future as a healthy part of our global environment.
All right, very cool. So Arwen and Aurelia in Alberta, I want to ask you another question while we still have you. And I'm curious about what you're doing today. Are you going to do anything special to celebrate World Ocean Day?
Draw pictures.
Oh, draw pictures. Can you take pictures of those pictures and tag them online for me? I'd love to see what you draw today. Oh, perfect. Yes. Good. Thank you. All right. Good stuff. Let's see. Jumping onto YouTube, we've lots of discussion going on. We've got a suggestion to make t-shirts out of ocean plastics. Very cool. Waterproof megaphones. Lots of stuff coming up. But we have Sandra wondering, Paul, about any areas or improvements that you have seen in ocean health. Are there any areas on our coast you've seen improvement? Are there any maybe laws or policy that's gone into place that you have seen make a difference?
So that's a great question, and definitely there have been some major advances. For example, 20 years ago, marine protected areas were almost unheard of, and yet more and more countries around the world are prioritizing marine protected areas as part of their strategies for how we interact with the oceans. So that's been a really big improvement. There are also some instances, not a huge number, but some, of more sustainable fisheries where managers have come up with approaches that are actually much more sustainable.
All right, perfect. Paul, thanks for a couple examples there. Let's see, let's grab another one here off YouTube before we visit some more of our camera groups. Jennifer is wondering, you know, heard about microplastics, but can you explain it in a simplified way? What is that concept of microplastics?
So microplastics can be produced in a couple of ways. One can actually make them tiny from the very start. And so that's what I was referring to in some shampoos and deodorants. They'll put them in there to try and make them work better. But of course, once you wash your hair and it goes down the drain, it eventually gets washed into the ocean. So these are very tiny particles, much smaller than even some of the smallest animals. And so when they ingest them, the fear is that they may get basically caught in their digestive tracts, in their intestines, and then they can't live anymore. The other way that microplastics can form is through the breakdown of larger pieces of plastic. And so over time, as the waves bang against them, they get beaten up into smaller and smaller pieces, and then eventually become microplastics. And so in a sense, microplastics are in many ways a bit more of a concern than larger plastics because we can't see them at all. And so animals are ingesting them, they're swallowing them, and we don't know what that means in terms of their health. So it could be they don't really hurt you, but maybe they do. And so this lack of information makes it really quite frightening because there is so much of it everywhere you look. Even in the deepest parts of the ocean, you can find microplastics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're having a hard enough time kind of wrapping our heads around how we can kind of take some of the bigger pieces out of the ocean. You know, when you're thinking of things that are hard to see if visible at all, well, it becomes a whole new challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Let's turn on another microphone here. We've got Victoria hanging out with us. Victoria, if you want to turn your microphone on for us. Victoria is joining us in British Columbia. How you doing, Victoria?
Fine, thank you. I was wondering what kind of harm plastics can do to animals and people when they get into our bodies and systems.
So it's a great question, and in fact, it's not one we necessarily have a good answer for. It's a relatively new problem, of course, plastics in the environment, and people really just started worrying about this maybe in the last 20 years or less. And so we do know that they end up in the tissues of animals, they get ingested, they end up in the stomachs, but we're not really sure what that means in terms of their health. Now, we do know that certainly larger pieces can basically fill the stomach. They won't get digested, and so eventually the animal can't feed anymore because the stomach is completely full of plastic. And so that, of course, is just a terrible situation. In terms of other sorts of effects, we just don't know. And so it is a form of a petroleum product that's been modified to create the plastic. It could conceivably have some sort of toxic effects, but these are areas of ongoing research. So I think in the next 10 years, we will know quite a lot more about those sorts of effects than we do now.
And then, Paul, is it true that the plastic can act as kind of a surface for other toxins in the water to bind to?
It absolutely can. And the other thing is that bacteria will bind to it. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can contribute to the complexity of the material and the fact that, as you say, toxins that weren't on the plastic could then become present on the plastic in abundances that are a little bit more worrisome and could become a real problem.
All right. So we have Miss Mars Patton joining us from British Columbia. If you want to unmute your mic and say hi to us. How you doing today?
Hi, everyone.
Oh, very cool to see some students in the classroom and socially distancing. Good job, everybody. Does anybody have a question for Paul about the ocean?
My friend Jersey does. Come on up, Jersey, so they can hear you, hon. Come on, stand up and just a little bit closer to the phone, the microphone, up here. See, right here. Now you can ask really loud.
Don't be shy. We can't get you through the camera.
If we see lots of plastic, who do we call?
If you see plastic, who do you call? Oh boy, that's a good question because you will see it. I can guarantee it. What I would suggest you could do is organize with your friends cleanup days on the beach. And so you could go around and actually pick up those plastics. It's so abundant out there. I'm not sure there's any one person you could call because they would say, well, there's a lot more of it out there. I could come and get this one piece, but that's not going to help a whole lot. But if a bunch of people go out and collect plastics, then we could actually make a difference. And that is one of the things that my university does, typically on World Oceans Day, is to organize a beach cleanup. And so we go around with garbage bags and pick up whatever's on the beach, which is often dominated by plastics, and try and reduce the problem.
And I suppose it's not just the beach. So if you're not close to the beach, you can go to your local park.
Absolutely.
Or
Absolutely.
to forest, and if you find things, then it's a good thing to do. And it actually feels quite nice to feel like you're doing something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want it in the rivers. I know microplastics are being found in the Great Lakes, and then all pathways eventually lead to the ocean. So we definitely want to keep it out of the systems, our water systems, any way that we can. And I can see where a lot of our group's minds are right now. A lot of people are thinking about plastic. We hear about it a lot. We hear a lot about reducing our single-use plastics. And I think that's something that's great to see that it's on the thoughts of so many students. But Paul, here's another question that just came in via YouTube. And this is about ghost fishing. Is ghost fishing an issue on the coasts around Canada?
Ghost fishing is a big problem. And for those of you who don't know about ghost fishing, what happens is fishermen sometimes put out nets and they leave them there because that's the way the nets work. But if they get swept away from the bottom, then they may lose them and they end up going around the ocean catching fish. And what's really problematic is that the animals get caught in the net, they die, and then they rot, and then the net can float up again and continue ghost fishing. And part of the challenge there is that a lot of the nets now are made from plastic type material that doesn't degrade very easily. 100 years ago, everyone used cotton-based nets, which did break down relatively quickly, but if you lost the net, then it would stop ghost fishing fairly quickly. But nowadays they can stay around for many, many years. And so some of the solutions to this are to put tracking devices on nets as you put them out. And so there's a chance then you can recover them if they get away. Certainly putting identifiers on nets so you can at least return them to the owner if they're caught. But trying to be really careful about your fishing gear and setting it out in ways that you're going to get it back and that it won't easily become dislodged. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And I want to share something that I think the students will think is pretty cool today. So, around the world, people are looking for things to be done with fishing nets. They wear out, they're discarded. What can be done with them? So there's some companies I know in the UK that are using them to make carpets out of, using the plastic material. But then there's a really cool group in Chile, and they make the discarded fish nets into skateboards. So how cool is that? They can take the plastics from there, recycle into a product that's definitely going to last a lot more than just a single use. So that's pretty cool. They're a group called Borreo, which is really awesome.
Actually, Joe, that goes on here in Canada. There are groups who make mats, door mats. In fact, the mats I have to my house here in Trinity, Newfoundland, are made from recycled fishing net. It's a fishing rope, I should say. And they look great, they work well, and they last a long time.
Very cool.
And a great example of invention. So there you go.
Yeah.
All right. And, I'm looking in the YouTube chat and the discussion is still going on about the dolphin speaker. So definitely a hot topic and a really cool idea. So we need to visit another group here live on camera. So I'm going to go to Miss Meeks. If you want to pop your microphone on for me, joining us in Raleigh, North Carolina, with some grade 6 students tuning in live via YouTube. How you doing today?
We're good. I've yet to get a question from my students. They were instructed to send it to me, but I did have a couple of questions of my own that I can relay back to them. One, the Little Inventors, that is for Canadian residents only, I'm assuming?
It's the competition itself is open to Canadian students. Okay. However, we do look at all of them coming in. So if you have, we have had inventions coming from across the world actually, and although they're not eligible for having their invention made real, they will get feedback, and anyone can participate.
Okay, thank you. And I also was wondering on the plastics, as the fish and ocean animals are ingesting the plastics, has there been any link to consuming those animals to human health? And then are any governments around the world starting to ban those microplastics that are in soaps or toothpastes or things like that? Is there any discussion of getting those banned?
I think there is discussion. I don't know of examples where they have been banned. I do know of companies that have voluntarily removed them from products because they realize, the writing's on the wall in terms of whether that's going to be allowed much longer. So I think that is going to come. Certainly, when we think in Canada, I don't know what the legislation plans are, but Canada has been very active on plastics. And so I think there's a chance we could see something there. In terms of your other question about the health risks, that's an active area of research right now. I don't know of any specific links between plastic consumption and illness in humans, for example. There are certainly other contaminants, I'm sure you know, in fish that have been linked to human health. Mercury and other contaminants, for example. But plastics per se, I don't know of any evidence yet that there's a problem, but that's not to say it doesn't exist. It's just that we haven't really looked before. But thank you for the question.
One thing that's really nice to hear is that although it's not about microplastic, but plastic bags throughout the world are getting more and more banned, and there's a real movement towards that. And it's interesting because the plastic bags were an invention that only came in the 1960s, so it's a relatively young product. But we are now getting to the stage where we've got at least 25 countries across the world that have basically said no more, in places that are really important like India and China, and we're seeing it in other places as well. So that is a very positive step, because microplastics, actually plastic bags do degrade quite rapidly, I think, probably. Yes. And that's one of the a big culprit basically for plastic pollution.
They're actually phasing them out here in Newfoundland. Unfortunately, COVID has put a little bit of a hiccup there, because right now people don't want shared bags going back and forth. And so we had almost done away with them but now they're coming back, but hopefully that's just a temporary thing.
Yep. And I think, Paul, you just brought up another good example of how students, how families can have an impact, and that's with how you make your purchases. Government sometimes can't move quickly, but companies can move quickly on their own when they find that people aren't using their products. And I know many face washes have, proactively started finding other material to use in them, to move away from those microbeads, to move away from those microplastics. So your purchase decisions at home can have a big impact on issues facing the ocean.
I think if you read the labels carefully, you can often see exactly what's in these products and make an informed decision about whether you want to buy it or not.
And then, of course, you can use your ideas to come up with alternatives to plastic bags or to plastic bottles or things like that. What can you do that would sort of change that and use different things? So we know you have ideas. We just want to hear them.
Absolutely. Let's see if we can take a couple more questions from our camera group. So give me a wave at the camera if we need to visit your class or your home one more time, because we would love to grab a couple more questions before we wrap up. I'll also watch YouTube and see if we have to make some visits as well. So let's see. What about our class hanging out with us in BC? Does anybody else have a question about the ocean? If you do, hop up in your seat for me. All right, here comes someone. Perfect.
Why do people throw the plastic in the ocean?
Well, why do people throw plastic in the ocean? Some people do it deliberately because they just don't care, which I think is really sad. But I think most people don't do it deliberately. They may drop it on the side of the road thinking it doesn't matter. It does. It may end up in the ocean or even on the side of the road. It's unfortunate because it may damage an animal that comes by and tries to consume it, or who knows what. So I think it's mostly people don't really understand exactly what they're doing when they throw plastic away. And so they don't necessarily dispose of it in a way that's going to ensure that it doesn't end up quickly coming back into the environment. So I think talking about it like we're doing today is really important, getting the message out and thinking about your plastics when you need them and making sure that they don't end up in the environment.
Absolutely. So Paul, another question here from the YouTube chat. How important is work like you do, the research and the science, to getting those new marine protected areas created?
Well, of course, it's hugely important, but seriously, I would say that when governments create marine protected areas, they want some sort of evidence that it's producing good, that it's actually doing something. And so this is why it becomes really important to monitor how that MPA, that marine protected area, changes over time. So do we see more fish there? Do we see more diversity of life? And so these sorts of things then give politicians the ammunition that they need to make the case that, yes, we're actually gaining a benefit, because there is a cost involved. The cost is that there's loss of access for fishermen and for industry to particular areas of the ocean. And so if they're going to lose that, they want to see some benefit associated with it. And so I think it's really important then that we do the research that demonstrates the value that we gain from these sorts of activities.
All right. I want to check in one more time with Guelph, Ontario. You can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you had, yep. All right. Go ahead and turn it on for me.
I was just wondering about COVID was mentioned there in the plastic bags. I know all the cruise ships have stopped for now. And I was wondering, would that have any impact positively, or would anyone be able to, was that researched, or how does, do we know?
That's a great question, namely the effect that COVID has had on ocean health. And I do have some colleagues who are working on that very question. The big one that might not immediately come to mind is noise. And so the ships, there are fewer of them moving around. We know that the amount of noise in the ocean is much greater than it used to be. And so for species like marine mammals that use sound to communicate, it's a real concern. And so there are people looking at whether this decrease that we've seen in noise in particular is going to have any sort of positive effect. And so we won't know the answer for a little while, but they are looking at it. Likewise, presumably there are fewer other sorts of contaminants going into the ocean from some sources. And so that is potential there to try and see what sort of effects we're having. But yeah, it is a research opportunity. I mean, it's terrible what COVID has done, but we should try to take advantage of any learning opportunities we can from this whole crisis.
Absolutely. And if we can, you know, we're going to see these changes, but the only way to keep them is if we act afterwards as well, because we will come out of this. And if we go right back to business as usual, then we're going to be in the same situation we were before. So, Paul, I think this is a great question to kind of sum things up today. We have tons of kids joining in, students from classrooms all across Canada joining us in the US. I think there's even some joining from overseas. What advice would you give a future marine scientist or marine biologist?
Well, I would say take the opportunities to learn and to try and find out what you can about what goes on in the oceans. Treat the oceans well, make them something that you are excited about and proud of, and find out what you can. And I think if you do that, then opportunities and excitement lay ahead for you, and lots of opportunity to try and do interesting things.
All right.
A great way to get curious and to explore is to take the Little Inventors Mission Protect Our Oceans challenge, because you'll have loads of things that you can explore and you can think about the solutions yourself. So I hope that you do that and you send us some inventions, because we'd love to see them.
We would love to see some inventions. So that's another good call out to all those who are on camera with us, to all those who are tuning in live via YouTube. Work with your teachers, work with your classrooms. Let's get some really cool inventions coming, especially groups. This is a great activity as we kind of get closer and closer to that summer vacation coming up. I want to give a huge shout out to all the camera groups, Aurelia, Arwen, Victoria, Claire, the students who I see on camera joining us in BC. I expect to see some really cool pictures coming on Twitter, some other social media later from your World Ocean celebration. I hope to see some really cool ideas come from everybody. And Paul and Catherine, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time to help us appreciate our oceans a little better, to inspire those who are tuning in today, and to get people excited about Little Inventors. This is such a cool opportunity to come up with an idea, have experts make it happen, and then see it out in the real world. I mean, wow.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
And to from home as well. You don't have to be in class or with your teacher. If you have ideas, the ideas don't wait. So thank you so much. We can't wait.
All right. So that's all the time we have for today. Again, a huge thank you to everybody who joined us. Don't forget, Mission Protect Our Oceans Challenge is on now. Today may be World Ocean Day, but we should celebrate our ocean all year long because it is absolutely incredible. Thanks again, everyone, for hanging out today, and we are going to sign off.